What I'm about to share with you isn't just about beauty fading with time. That would be natural, expected. This is about something far more sinister, a systematic destruction of the women who made Hollywood what it became. I spent months researching these stories, digging through studio archives and medical records that were never meant to see daylight. What I found was a pattern so disturbing that the industry has spent decades covering it up. By the time we reach actress number 15, you'll see it too. But let's start with the woman whose transformation shocked even her closest friends. Judy Garland, the girl whose rainbow turned black. Everyone knows Judy Garland as Dorothy, that sweet girl from Kansas with the voice of an angel. But what they did to her, starting when she was just a child, created one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking transformations. When Frances Gumm signed with MGM at 13, she was a bright-eyed girl with natural talent and infectious energy. But to the studio, she was a product to be molded. And the man in charge, Louis B. Mayer, saw only dollar signs. What he and his system created was a tragedy that lasted a lifetime, a slow-motion destruction hidden behind a dazzling smile. Here's what'll make your blood boil. MGM studio doctors started giving Judy stimulants when she was just a child. Some reports claim as young as 10 years old, amphetamines to keep her thin and energized for grueling 18-hour workdays, followed by barbiturates to force her to sleep. When those stopped working, stronger substances were introduced. By the time she finished filming The Wizard of Oz at 17, she was completely dependent on a cycle of prescription medications orchestrated by the very people meant to protect her. But that wasn't even the worst part. Studio executives relentlessly told her she wasn't pretty enough, forcing her onto diets of nothing but chicken soup, black coffee, and 80 cigarettes a day to suppress her appetite. They capped her teeth and used rubber discs to reshape her nose. Mayer himself reportedly called her "my little hunchback," a cruel jab at her slight curvature of the spine. The transformation was gradual at first, but by her 20s, the sparkle in her eyes had dimmed. Her once round face became gaunt, and that natural glow was replaced by the hollow look of someone fighting invisible demons. By her early 40s, Judy looked decades older. The substances had ravaged her body, and financial ruin forced her to perform in nightclubs just to survive. The stress was etched into every line on her face. When she passed away in 1969, at just 47, the girl who made America believe in magic had become the ultimate victim of a system that treated children like commodities. Drop a comment if you think MGM should be held responsible for what they did to Judy, because what happened to our next star was just as deliberate. Marilyn Monroe, the goddess who never found peace. Marilyn Monroe wasn't born. She was meticulously created. And the woman behind the creation, Norma Jean Mortensen, paid a price so steep that Hollywood still refuses to talk about it. Her childhood was a blueprint for trauma that would break most people. 12 different foster homes, a period in an orphanage, an abuse that left scars no amount of fame could ever heal. She married at 16 simply to avoid being sent back into the system, but escaping her past proved impossible. The ghosts of her youth haunted every step of her ascent to stardom, whispering that she was unworthy and unlovable. By the early 1950s, she had transformed into Marilyn Monroe, platinum blonde perfection, the ultimate fantasy of desire and innocence combined. But here's what the cameras never showed. Marilyn suffered from severe anxiety, depression, and endometriosis, a painful condition that made simple tasks feel impossible. She would show up hours late to sets, not from arrogance, but from a crippling fear of failure that would leave her physically ill in her dressing room. The transformation from Norma Jean to Marilyn started subtly, but the cracks began to show. Press photos from the early 60s reveal a different woman, her face puffy from medication, her eyes tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. She was heavily dependent on barbiturates to sleep and amphetamines to function, often mixing them in dangerous combinations that left her disoriented and barely functional. Her final film, Something's Got to Give, was never completed. The studio, 20th Century Fox, fired her just weeks before her passing, citing her chronic lateness and inability to work. The goddess was becoming human, fragile, and ill, and Hollywood had no use for human Marilyn. On August 5th, 1962, she was found alone in her Brentwood home, a phone in her hand. She had been trying to call her psychiatrist for help. At just 36 years old, one of the most famous women in the world passed away, completely alone, a victim of her own creation, and an industry that built her up only to abandon her when she needed them most. Jean Harlow, the platinum blonde's poisonous beauty. Before Marilyn, there was Jean Harlow. She was the original Platinum Blonde, a nickname coined by Howard Hughes' marketing machine. But that iconic platinum color was exactly what contributed to her untimely end. Born Harleen Carpenter in Kansas City, she was thrust into show business by a domineering mother who saw her daughter's stunning beauty as a ticket to wealth and status. Harleyan was forced to elope at 16 just to escape her suffocating home life, only to find herself trapped in an abusive marriage. It was her signature look that became her undoing. To achieve and maintain that famous platinum color, Harlow endured weekly treatments with a toxic mixture of Clorox bleach, ammonia, Lux's soap flakes, and peroxide. This harsh chemical cocktail was applied directly to her scalp, a painful process that she had to endure to meet the public's and the studio's expectations. She was literally poisoning herself to maintain the image that had made her a star, unaware of the devastating internal damage it was causing. Her personal life was just as toxic, plagued by tragedy and scandal. Her second husband, legendary MGM executive Paul Byrne, was found with a gunshot wound just 2 months after their wedding, in a case that remains one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. The combination of factors was a death sentence. Harlow had suffered from scarlet fever as a teenager, which had already damaged her kidneys, compounded by years of absorbing toxic hair chemicals and a reliance on heavy drinking to cope with her traumatic life. Her health began to fail when she was barely in her mid-20s. While filming Saratoga with Clark Gable in 1937, she became visibly and critically ill on set. Her once perfect complexion turned a sallow gray, her body became bloated from uremic poisoning, and that signature platinum hair began falling out in clumps, forcing her to wear wigs. On June 7, 1937, Jean Harlow passed away from kidney failure at just 26 years old. The very beauty treatment that made her famous was the source of her fatal decline. Share this video with someone who needs to know the real cost of Hollywood's beauty standards, because what happened to our next star will shock you even more. Frances Farmer. Beauty destroyed by the system. Frances Farmer had everything: stunning beauty, raw intelligence, formidable talent, and a fierce, unapologetic independence that the rigid Hollywood studio system simply could not tolerate. What they did to her in response is one of the most horrific and cautionary tales I've ever researched. A story of how an institution can systematically destroy a woman who refuses to be broken. Born in Seattle in 1913, Frances was brilliant from a young age, winning national essay contests and even securing a trip to the Soviet Union as a student, an act that immediately put her on a government watch list. But it was her refusal to conform to Hollywood's unwritten rules that made her powerful enemies. She spoke out against the studio system, refused to play the typical starlet role in interviews, and maintained her intellectual and political passions. Her career was promising, with notable performances in films like Come and Get It. But her outspoken nature made studio heads nervous. Then came 1942, and her entire world collapsed. After a series of minor arrests, including one for driving with her headlights on in a wartime dim-out zone, Frances was declared mentally incompetent by her own mother, who had her institutionalized. What followed was 7 years of unimaginable horror that would not only destroy her beauty, but shatter her spirit into a million pieces. Inside Western State Hospital in Washington, she was subjected to treatments that can only be described as state-sanctioned torture. She endured dozens of sessions of electroshock therapy without anesthesia, insulin shock treatments that sent her into comas, and ice-cold hydrotherapy baths administered as punishment. She was kept in straitjackets for days at a time and was subjected to experimental procedures that left her barely functional. There have long been allegations, detailed in her posthumous autobiography, that she was also subjected to a transorbital lobotomy, though this remains a point of contention among historians. When she was finally released in 1950, Frances was a broken woman. Her once vibrant face appeared prematurely aged and puffy. Her expressions were flattened by trauma and medication, and the fire that once lit up the screen had been completely and irrevocably extinguished. She tried a comeback, but the damage was too deep. Her beauty wasn't lost to age or illness. It was systematically destroyed by institutions that punished a woman for her own mind. Rita Hayworth, the love goddess who forgot herself. Rita Hayworth was famously dubbed the Love Goddess by Life magazine, but her real story is about a woman who never felt worthy of love. The process Hollywood used to create her iconic image was so brutal that it stripped away essential pieces of her soul, leaving her feeling like an imposter in her own life. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino to Spanish and Irish parents, she underwent one of the most painful transformations in Hollywood history. Starting at age 12, she was forced to perform with her father in seedy Tijuana nightclubs, where she endured horrific and unspeakable abuse abuse that would haunt her for the rest of her days. To make her appear more American and less Latina, Columbia Pictures head Harry Cohn forced her to undergo excruciating changes. Her naturally low, beautiful Hispanic hairline was raised an entire inch through 2 years of weekly painful electrolysis sessions. They dyed her natural black hair auburn red and made her adopt her Irish mother's maiden name because, in the studio's eyes, Cancino sounded too ethnic. These changes created the illusion of the perfect, all-American bombshell, but they also disconnected Rita from her own identity. She later lamented, "Men go to bed with Gilda, but they wake up with me." She had become a stranger to herself, playing a character even when the cameras stopped rolling, forever trying to live up to an image that was never real. By the late 1960s, Rita began showing alarming signs of confusion and memory loss. Her erratic behavior was initially and cruelly misdiagnosed as chronic alcoholism, a label that further isolated her. In reality, she was suffering from the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. The decline was heartbreaking to witness. The graceful woman who had defined glamour became disoriented and reclusive. She would forget her lines on set, lose her balance during interviews, and eventually couldn't recognize her own legendary films. By the 1980s, under the care of her daughter, Rita no longer recognized herself in mirrors or photographs. The love goddess had not only lost the beauty that made her famous, but the memory of ever having been beautiful at all. She passed away in 1987, a tragic end for a woman who spent her life as a fantasy for others, only to lose her own reality. Dorothy Dandridge, brilliance never allowed to shine. Dorothy Dandridge was a force of nature. She broke one of Hollywood's most formidable barriers as the first African-American woman to be nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. But the industry's deeply ingrained intolerance toward performers of color ensured her light would be extinguished before it could ever truly shine. Her childhood was not one of innocence, but of brutal discipline and exploitation. She and her sister were managed by their mother's abusive partner, who forced them into exhausting performance schedules as the Wonder Children from the age of 3, leaving no room for a normal life. This early trauma set the stage for a lifetime of seeking validation from an industry that was built to reject her. With her glowing skin, deep expressive eyes, and a magnetic charisma that was impossible to ignore, Dorothy had everything needed for superstardom. Her Oscar nomination for Carmen Jones in 1954 should have shattered the glass ceiling. Instead, it just showed her how thick the glass was. She was passed over for major roles like Cleopatra, which was specifically written with a black woman in mind, but was ultimately given to a white actress, Elizabeth Taylor. Anti-miscegenation laws of the era meant she couldn't be cast opposite white leading men in romantic roles, which severely limited her opportunities and relegated her to exotic parts. The constant rejection and the pressure of being a pioneer took a visible toll. She began showing signs of intense stress, nervousness, dark circles under her eyes that no makeup could hide, and a noticeable tremor in her hands during interviews. Her personal struggles added to the immense burden. She was forced to place her severely brain-damaged daughter into state care when she could no longer afford private treatment, an act that caused her immense guilt and sorrow. During her lucrative Vegas performances, where she was the star attraction, she was often forced to use service elevators and stay in segregated accommodations. By the early 1960s, photographs showed a woman aged far beyond her years, her vibrant face lined with exhaustion and disappointment. In 1965, Dorothy was found deceased in her Los Angeles apartment at just 42. While officially ruled an accidental overdose of an antidepressant, her end was rooted in a lifetime of systematic rejection and heartbreak. Dorothy Dandridge's beauty didn't fade, it was eroded by a society that refused to let her thrive. Veronica Lake, the star, swallowed by shadows. Veronica Lake's signature peekaboo hairstyle was so iconic that it became a national security issue during World War II. The government had to ask her to change it because so many female factory workers were copying her look and getting their hair caught in machinery. She was the absolute pinnacle of 1940s cool. But by the 1960s, this Hollywood goddess was serving cocktails in a seedy New York bar, completely unrecognizable to the world that once adored her every move. Her fall from grace was one of the most shocking and complete transformations in Hollywood history. With her petite 4'11" frame, icy blonde hair, and a sultry gaze that could cut through steel, Veronica was the queen of film noir, starring in classics like This Gun for Hire and The Blue Dahlia opposite Alan Ladd. But behind the camera, she was developing a reputation for being difficult to work with, a label often pinned on women who didn't conform. In reality, she was struggling with untreated schizophrenia and a growing dependency on alcohol, which she used to self-medicate her deep-seated anxieties. The studio system, which had built her up into a phenomenon, had no patience for her struggles. When her contract was up, they simply let her go, casting her out into the cold. By the 1950s, her transformation was devastating. A series of personal tragedies, including the loss of a child, deepened her reliance on alcohol. She gained a significant amount of weight. Her once smooth complexion became blotchy and uneven from years of heavy drinking. And that iconic blonde hair lost all its shine and luster. Then came the shock heard around the world. A 1962 newspaper article revealed that Veronica Lake, the woman who had defined glamour for an entire generation, was working as a cocktail waitress in Manhattan. The fallen star was nearly unrecognizable, worn down by years of hardship and addiction. She passed away in 1973 from hepatitis and kidney failure at just 50 years old. Her once luminous beauty, long since consumed by the shadows of mental illness and a system that abandoned her. Linda Darnell, the perfect face, consumed by flames. Linda Darnell was once famously called the girl with the perfect face, a face so naturally beautiful and symmetrical that the studio's makeup artists claimed it required no enhancement or correction. Her end was so horrific and so cruelly ironic that it still haunts Hollywood to this day. With her wide-set, almond-shaped eyes, high cheekbones, and flawless skin, Linda had a look that made her perfect for the lush world of Technicolor, starring in extravagant productions like Forever Amber, and earning critical acclaim for her role in A Letter to Three Wives. But as she entered her 30s, a point when many actresses today are just hitting their stride, Hollywood's obsession with youth meant the quality roles became fewer and fewer. Her professional decline was mirrored by personal struggles. A series of failed marriages, severe financial instability, and a growing dependence on alcohol to cope with her anxieties began to take their toll. The luminous beauty that had defined her career started to show the strain of a difficult life. By the early 1960s, she was taking small television parts and appearing in low-budget European films, a far cry from her glamorous days as a Hollywood headliner. Then, on April 9, 1965, tragedy struck in the most unimaginable way. She was staying at the home of her former secretary in a suburb of Chicago, watching one of her old movies on television, when a fire broke out. Linda was trapped on the second floor with her friend's daughter. In a final act of heroism, she managed to help the young girl escape the flames, but she was unable to save herself. By the time firefighters reached her, she had suffered massive, horrific burns over more than 80% of her body. She passed away in the hospital the next day, at just 41 years old. The woman who had been celebrated for her natural, untouched beauty was ultimately disfigured beyond recognition in her final, terrifying moments. Linda Darnell's story is a haunting reminder of how quickly life and beauty can be consumed, her perfect face tragically lost in the very flames of her own heroism. Patricia Neal, when stroke stole symmetry. Patricia Neal possessed a raw, magnetic beauty that was anything but conventional. She had sharp, intelligent cheekbones, deeply expressive eyes, and a husky, world-weary voice that brought a profound depth to every role she played. Her Oscar win for the 1963 classic HUD, where she starred opposite Paul Newman, proved she was far more than just a pretty face. She was a dramatic powerhouse. Then, at the absolute peak of her career and personal happiness, a series of massive strokes threatened to steal not just her career, but her very identity. In 1965, while pregnant with her fifth child with her husband, the famed author Roald Dahl, Patricia suffered 3 devastating strokes in quick succession that left her in a coma for 3 weeks. When she finally awoke, the world she knew was gone. She faced significant paralysis on the right side of her body, partial blindness in one eye, and severe aphasia, which impaired her ability to speak and understand language. Her once expressive face, a critical tool for any actor, had lost its perfect symmetry, the muscles on one side drooping. Doctors gave her a grim prognosis, suggesting she would likely never walk or talk again. But Patricia, with the relentless and sometimes brutal help of her husband, refused to surrender. Through tireless and grueling therapy, she fought her way back from the brink. The effects of the strokes, however, remained visible for the rest of her life. Her facial muscles never fully recovered, leaving her expressions subtly but permanently uneven. Yet, when she made her courageous return to the screen in The Subject Was Roses, a role that earned her another Oscar nomination, critics and audiences saw something deeper than conventional beauty. They saw resilience made visible. The stroke had altered her physical appearance, but it had revealed a different kind of beauty, one forged in survival and unimaginable courage. Patricia continued working for decades, her altered face a testament to her strength, proving that true artistry transcends physical perfection. Gene Tierney, tragedy written in every line. Jean Tierney's face was considered by many to be flawless, a masterpiece of perfect bone structure, distinctive, slightly exotic features, and deep-set, mesmerizing eyes that made her the ultimate 1940s beauty. She was the star of classics like Laura and Leave Her to Heaven, projecting an image of untouchable elegance. But behind that perfect facade, a real-life heartbreak so profound would age her in ways that time alone never could, leaving a permanent shadow on her stunning features. In 1943, during the height of her fame, and while pregnant with her first child, Jean made a guest appearance at the Hollywood Canteen. It was there that she contracted rubella from a female Marine who had broken quarantine just to meet her idol. The consequences were catastrophic. Her daughter, Daria, was born blind, deaf, and with severe cognitive impairments requiring lifelong institutional care. The emotional devastation of this tragedy sent Jean into a downward spiral of severe depression and a complete mental breakdown. In the 1950s, seeking help, she was subjected to the primitive and brutal psychiatric treatments of the era. She endured nearly 30 sessions of electroconvulsive therapy, a procedure that, at the time, was administered with high voltage and without modern safeguards. The trauma of the treatments, she later claimed, permanently altered her facial expressiveness. Once animated and luminous, her eyes lost their brilliant spark. Her face, once capable of a vast emotional range, became stiffer and more withdrawn. Jean herself once poignantly said, "They fixed my mind, but broke something in my face." Though she attempted a comeback in the 1960s, critics and audiences noted the change. The tragedy of her daughter's condition and the trauma of the cure had left indelible marks that no makeup or camera trick could ever hide. Her breathtaking beauty hadn't simply faded, it had been etched with the lines of unimaginable sorrow, a living portrait of a mother's grief. Hedy Lamarr, brilliant mind, destroyed face. Here is perhaps the ultimate and most tragic irony in Hollywood history. Hedy Lamarr was frequently called the most beautiful woman in the world, a title she carried like a gilded cage. But her mind was even more extraordinary than her face. During World War II, she co-invented a frequency-hopping communication system to help guide Allied torpedoes, a technology that became the foundational principle for modern Wi-Fi, GPS, and Bluetooth. Yet she was only ever valued for her looks, a currency that proved to have an expiration date. When that currency ran out, she made a series of desperate decisions that destroyed the very thing that had defined her. As she aged, and the Hollywood roles grew scarce, Hedy became obsessed with preserving her legendary beauty. She turned to experimental cosmetic procedures in the 1950s and 60s, long before the establishment of modern safety standards. She sought out back-alley doctors and underwent risky, unproven treatments in a desperate attempt to halt the aging process. The results were catastrophic. Instead of preserving her beauty, the procedures destroyed it. Her face began to stiffen into an unnatural mask. Her expressions grew limited and frozen. The perfect symmetry that had mesmerized the world became distorted and strange. Her upper lip sagged, and her cheeks appeared locked in an unnatural position. Directors who had once clamored to work with her now struggled to film her, unsure how to light or frame her now altered features. By the 1970s, Hedy had withdrawn from public life entirely, refusing interviews and living as a recluse, communicating with the world primarily by phone. She passed away in 2000 at the age of 85. Only after her passing was her brilliance as an inventor widely celebrated and acknowledged. A woman whose mind literally changed the world was only valued for her looks, and when she tried to cling to that value, she lost them completely. A heartbreaking testament to Hollywood's misplaced priorities. Which story has shocked you most so far? Let me know in the comments, because we're only halfway through this heartbreaking journey. Ava Gardner, When Fate Silenced Beauty. Ava Gardner was raw, earthy perfection. Dubbed the world's most beautiful animal, her emerald eyes, sultry smile, and smoky voice were magnetic, defining mid-century glamour in iconic films like The Killers and The Barefoot Contessa. She was a sharecropper's daughter from North Carolina, who became Hollywood royalty, a woman whose beauty was so potent it seemed almost supernatural. But in her later years, a cruel twist of fate would attack the very features that had made her a legend, leading to a heartbreaking and reclusive final chapter. In 1986, while living in London, Ava suffered a devastating stroke that left the entire left side of her body and face paralyzed. The effects were immediate and profound. Her famously sensual voice was reduced to a difficult slur. Her iconic lopsided smile became permanently fixed, and her mobility was severely limited, confining her mostly to her bed. The transformation was heartbreaking for a woman whose identity had been so intrinsically linked to her physical allure and vitality. According to her loyal housekeeper, Carmen Vargas, Ava had most of the mirrors in her home removed removed, unable to bear seeing her altered reflection. She couldn't reconcile the image in the glass with the goddess she had once been. When she did grant rare interviews, she would position herself carefully, ensuring the cameras could only capture the still unaffected right side of her face. The woman whose breathtaking presence had once dominated the silver screen now fought to maintain her dignity in the face of cruel circumstances. Her old flame, Frank Sinatra, reportedly paid for her medical expenses, chartering a private jet to fly her to the United States for treatment. Ava passed away from pneumonia in 1990 at the age of 67. For someone whose beauty had defined her entire existence, her decline was especially painful. Yet she remained fiercely private and dignified to the very end, proving that true grace is not about perfection, but about how one faces its loss. Clara Bowes, the It Girl's Invisible Wounds. Clara Bow was the living embodiment of the Roaring Twenties. With her bobbed hair, Cupid's bow lips, and boundless, vivacious energy, she defined the flapper era and was Hollywood's very first it girl. But behind her carefree, rebellious image was a woman carrying a burden of trauma so immense that it would eventually extinguish her famous sparkle and erase her from the public eye. Clara's childhood was a relentless nightmare of grinding poverty and horrific abuse. She was raised in a Brooklyn tenement with a schizophrenic mother who, in a psychotic episode, once held a butcher knife to her throat, threatening to end her life rather than let her become an actress. Her father, meanwhile, violated her trust in the most unforgivable ways. She escaped into acting, and her natural, uninhibited talent made her a massive star. But the press, after building her up, turned on her with vicious cruelty during a scandalous trial in 1931, where her former secretary aired all of her private secrets. Clara's mental health, already fragile from her childhood trauma, began to deteriorate rapidly. The scandals, combined with the pressures of fame and the advent of talkies, which made her thick Brooklyn accent a liability, were too much to bear. She suffered a nervous breakdown and retired from the screen at just 28. By the 1940s, her condition had worsened. She was hearing voices and seeing things that weren't there. She spent years in and out of sanitariums and was diagnosed with the same schizophrenia that had destroyed her mother, her worst fear realized. She underwent shock therapy and spent the last 25 years of her life as a recluse, living in a quiet bungalow, far from the Hollywood that had both made and broken her. When she passed away from a heart attack in 1965, she had been largely forgotten by the public for decades. The It Girl had become the Invisible Woman, her vibrant beauty erased not by time, but by the devastating mental illness she likely inherited and the unimaginable trauma she had endured from the very beginning. Vivien Leigh, beauty dismantled by inner storms. Vivien Leigh was breathtaking as Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. She captivated global audiences with her porcelain perfection, piercing green eyes, and fiery spirit. But behind that legendary beauty was a lifetime of inner turmoil that would slowly and visibly dismantle her appearance, leaving a tragic story etched on her delicate features. Vivien was diagnosed with what we now call bipolar disorder, but in her time, treatment was primitive, misunderstood, and often cruel. She endured extreme, unpredictable mood swings that physically transformed her in jarring ways. During her manic episodes, she would have boundless, frenetic energy, often becoming restless and emaciated from lack of sleep and food. During her depressive spells, a profound lethargy would take over. Her face would lose all its vibrancy. Her expressions would flatten completely, and the light in her famous eyes would seem to go out. Her co-stars often remarked on these shocking shifts, noting how she could appear radiant one day and utterly depleted the next. Adding to her struggles was a recurring battle with tuberculosis, a disease that plagued her for decades, causing rapid weight loss, and a state of visible exhaustion that became increasingly difficult to conceal with makeup and costumes. By the 1950s, the combined toll of her mental and physical illnesses was undeniable. Photographs from this period show a woman with hollowed cheeks, sunken eyes, and a fragile, weakened presence that was heartbreaking to witness. The change was so profound that during the filming of Elephant Walk in 1953, she suffered a major breakdown on set and had to be replaced by Elizabeth Taylor. Vivien passed away from a relapse of tuberculosis in 1967 at just 53 years old. Her iconic beauty wasn't lost to age. It was relentlessly dismantled by the invisible storms of mental illness and chronic disease that raged within her. Lupe Velez, the Spitfire's final performance. Lupe Velez was pure, unadulterated fire on screen. Known as the Mexican Spitfire, she blazed across Hollywood screens with a boundless, chaotic energy and an exotic beauty that was impossible to tame. Her tragic end at the age of 36 is often shrouded in cruel tabloid myths, but the reality reveals a desperate woman trapped by the rigid social codes of her time. Her final act was a heartbreaking attempt to preserve her image in her final hours. In late 1944, Lupe discovered she was pregnant. The father, a young actor named Harald Ramond, refused to marry her. For a devoutly Catholic and unmarried woman in the 1940s, having a child out of wedlock meant complete social and professional ruin. The scandal would destroy everything she had worked for. Faced with this impossible choice, she saw only one way out. She decided to stage what she intended to be a beautiful, graceful exit. A final, perfect performance. In the hours before her passing, she had her hair and makeup done meticulously. She adorned her bedroom with flowers and candles, creating a serene and beautiful scene. She dressed in a fine silver silk gown and lay down on her bed to take a fatal overdose of Seconal, hoping to be found looking as glamorous and peaceful as a sleeping princess. The tragic reality was far grislier than she planned, a detail the tabloids latched on to with grotesque glee. But her intent remains a poignant and heartbreaking part of her story. She was still performing even in her final moments, trying to control the narrative of her image one last time. Lupe passed away on December 13th, 1944, at just 36. Her vibrant beauty, untouched by age, but ultimately lost to the despair of a woman trapped by circumstances she couldn't escape. Her legacy, though long distorted by cruel myths, is a powerful reminder of the impossible pressures placed on women of her era. Grace Kelly, perfection preserved by tragedy. Grace Kelly was elegance personified. With her cool, aristocratic poise and classic beauty, she brought a unique sense of refined glamour to Hollywood before leaving it all behind to become a real-life princess in Monaco. Her transformation is unique on this list because it was her sudden, tragic passing that preserved her beauty, freezing her image in time forever. On September 13th, 1982, Grace was driving with her youngest daughter, Stephanie, along the winding cliffside roads of Monaco, the very same roads she had famously navigated in the Hitchcock film To Catch a Thief. It was on this treacherous route that she suffered a minor stroke. She lost control of the car, which careened off the mountainside, tumbling over 100 feet before coming to a rest. Princess Stephanie survived with serious injuries, but Grace's were catastrophic. Doctors who treated her later, had she survived the crash, she would have been severely disabled and would have required extensive facial reconstruction. The world's most iconic face would have been permanently and irrevocably altered. She passed away from her injuries the next day, at the age of 52. Her family, in an effort to protect her legacy, ensured that no photographs from the accident or her final moments were ever released to the public. This decision left the world with only the memories of her pristine, untouchable perfection. Unlike so many of her peers who endured the slow, public decline of health, beauty, or career, Grace Kelly's passing froze her image in time. She would never be seen as old, frail, or scarred. Her beauty was preserved, but the cost was the ultimate one, a life cut tragically short. Her story stands as a stark, poignant counterpoint to the others. The only way for a Hollywood goddess to remain perfect forever was to leave the world too soon. Dolores Hart, the beauty who chose the veil. Dolores Hart was on the cusp of major stardom. Beautiful, talented, and charming, she was often compared to Grace Kelly for her poised and elegant demeanor. She was famously the girl who gave Elvis his first on-screen kiss, starring opposite the king of rock and roll in Loving You and King Creole. By the age of 24, she had a promising career, a handsome fiancé, and a lucrative multi-film contract. Then she shocked Hollywood and the world by walking away from it all to answer a higher calling. Her transformation wasn't one of tragedy or decay, but of profound spiritual choice. In 1963, at the height of her fame, Dolores Hart broke off her engagement and left Hollywood behind to become a Benedictine nun at the Abbey of Regina Lodis in Connecticut. She traded designer gowns for a simple black habit. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair was hidden beneath a veil, and the world of makeup, mirrors, and red carpets became completely irrelevant to her life. Her stunning beauty, once meticulously maintained for the cameras, was allowed to soften into the natural lines of age, untouched by Hollywood's relentless obsession with preserving youth at any cost. Her journey was a rejection of the very values that this list explores. Decades later, in the 2012 Oscar-nominated documentary, Short God is the Bigger Elvis, the world saw her again. Now Reverend Mother Dolores Hart. She was a woman whose face reflected not the scars of an unforgiving industry, but a lifetime of devotion and inner peace. Her appearance had changed with time, as all do, but her transformation was marked by a serene grace rather than tragedy. She chose a different kind of life, one where the value of a person was not measured by their beauty or their box office draw, but by the state of their soul. Her story is a powerful reminder that for some, true beauty is found not in being seen, but in seeing beyond the superficial world. Barbara Payton, beauty destroyed by scandal. Barbara Payton's fall from grace was as swift and spectacular as her initial rise. With her platinum blonde hair, smoldering eyes, and a magnetic tough girl screen presence, she appeared destined for major stardom after a breakout performance in the 1950s film noir classic Kiss Tomorrow, Goodbye, opposite James Cagney. But her chaotic personal life, fueled by addiction and desperation, would create a scandal so toxic it would not only end her career, but completely ravage her once stunning looks. Her transformation stands as one of the most jarring and tragic in Hollywood history. The turning point was a high-profile and violent love triangle between Payton and two actors, the rugged Tom Neal and the sophisticated Franchot Tone. The affair culminated in a brutal fistfight in 1951, where Neal beat Tone so badly that he was hospitalized with a broken cheekbone, a broken nose, and a cerebral concussion. The scandal made national headlines, and Payton's reputation was shattered. Hollywood, which loves a bad boy but despises a scandalous woman, blacklisted her almost overnight. With her A-list career in freefall, Barbara's life spiraled into a vortex of alcohol, illegal substances, and desperation. By the late 1950s, she was broke and suffering from full-blown alcoholism and substance addiction. She was arrested multiple times for passing bad checks and eventually resorted to prostitution to support her habits, sometimes sleeping on bus benches on Hollywood's Skid Row. Photographs from this period are shocking. Her once beautiful face became bloated and puffy. Her skin was marked by years of abuse and neglect, and her eyes held a vacant, haunted look. In 1967, she was found deceased on the bathroom floor of her parents' home in San Diego from heart and liver failure. She was ravaged by malnutrition and chronic alcoholism at just 39 years old. Her story is a terrifying example of how quickly Hollywood's dream can curdle into a nightmare from which there is no waking up. Gloria Graham, altered by her own hand. Gloria Graham was the quintessential film noir actress. With her sultry, pouty lips, bedroom eyes, and a unique ability to project both vulnerability and danger, she was a distinctive and captivating presence on screen, winning an Oscar for her role in The Bad and the Beautiful. But she harbored a deep insecurity about her looks, particularly her upper lip, which she believed was too thin. This obsession led her to take matters into her own hands, with disastrous results that would permanently alter her career and her famous face. Dissatisfied with her appearance, Graham began experimenting with early cosmetic procedures and her own self-made remedies. Most famously, she would stuff cotton balls or tissues under her upper lip to make it appear fuller. This practice not only felt unnatural, but also affected her speech, often making her co-stars complain that they couldn't understand her lines and that kissing her was an unpleasant experience. As she aged, she turned to more permanent, yet still primitive, plastic surgery. An early procedure on her lip was initially successful, but over time, the wax or silicone used as a filler hardened and shifted, causing lumps, stiffness, and noticeable facial asymmetry. Directors and cinematographers began to struggle to shoot her from flattering angles. Her range of expressions became limited, and her speech was permanently altered. The very feature she had tried to enhance had become a liability, contributing to the decline of her career in the late 1950s. She later developed breast cancer, but resisted conventional treatment, instead seeking out alternative therapies. In 1981, she collapsed on set in England, and it was discovered her cancer had returned with a vengeance. She passed away shortly after, at the age of 57, a cautionary tale of how the pressure for physical perfection can lead to self-destruction. Susan Hayward, victim of hidden poison. Susan Hayward was a force of nature, a striking redhead with a fiery personality that made her perfect for the vivid world of early Technicolor. She was a fighter on screen and in life, a 5-time Oscar nominee who finally won for her powerful performance in I Want to Live. But her life was cut short by a hidden, insidious poison, a danger she was unknowingly exposed to during the filming of one of Hollywood's most notorious flops, which led to a horrifying and tragic transformation. In 1956, she starred as the female lead in the epic The Conqueror, produced by Howard Hughes. The film was shot in the desert of Utah, directly downwind of a U.S. government nuclear testing site in Nevada. The cast and crew spent weeks on location, completely unaware that the soil was saturated with radioactive fallout from recent atomic bomb tests. By the early 1960s, Susan began suffering from persistent and unexplained health issues. There were noticeable changes in her complexion and energy levels, early signs that something was terribly wrong inside her body. In 1972, she was diagnosed with multiple brain tumors. The aggressive cancer and the grueling treatments that followed took a devastating toll on her appearance. Her face became swollen from steroids, her vibrant red hair thinned and fell out, and her famously fiery eyes grew dull with pain and exhaustion. She made her final, heartbreaking public appearance at the 1974 Academy Awards, supported by Charlton Heston, wearing a wig and clearly very ill, to present the Best Actress award. She was just one of a shocking number of people from that film set who later developed cancer. Of the 220 cast and crew members, an astonishing 91 contracted the disease, including her co-stars John Wayne and Agnes Moorehead, and the director, Dick Powell. Susan passed away in 1975, a victim of a silent, invisible threat that stole her future. Audrey Hepburn, grace that transcended beauty. Audrey Hepburn's story is different from the others on this list. While she did undergo a significant physical transformation at the end of her life, it didn't reveal a tragedy of Hollywood excess or a loss of self. Instead, it revealed that her true, enduring beauty always came from within. Her iconic gamine figure and delicate features were not just a genetic gift. They were, in part, the result of severe wartime malnutrition. As a teenager during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, she survived the Dutch hunger winter, subsisting on tulip bulbs and boiled grass, an experience that permanently affected her growth and left her with lifelong health issues. Her beauty was always more about grace, elegance, and spirit than classic Hollywood glamour. But in 1992, she was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of abdominal cancer. The disease and its subsequent treatments caused her already slim frame to become alarmingly thin. In her final months, her once radiant features grew gaunt and hollowed, and she was often in great pain. But instead of hiding from the world, she did something remarkable. She dedicated her final months to the cause closest to her heart, her humanitarian work as a goodwill ambassador for UNICEF. Just months before her passing, in a state of extreme frailty, she undertook an arduous trip to Somalia to bring awareness to the devastating famine there. Her final public appearances were not those of a glamorous starlet clinging to her image, but of a woman of quiet strength and profound empathy, her luminous spirit shining brighter than ever, even as her physical body failed. When she passed away in 1993, the world mourned not just a movie star, but a great humanitarian. Audrey Hepburn's final transformation showed that while physical beauty is fleeting, the beauty of a compassionate soul is eternal. Which of these transformations affected you most deeply? Share your thoughts below, because these women's stories deserve to be remembered. They gave us magic, wonder, and unforgettable performances that still move us today. In return, the industry gave them misery, exploitation, and abandonment. If their stories have moved you as much as they've moved me, hit that subscribe button, because the best way to honor their memory is to make sure their truth is never forgotten again. They were more than just beautiful faces. They were human beings who deserved love, respect, and dignity.